Cyclones threaten life and property along the Queensland coast nearly every summer. Coastal towns and cities may escape serious damage as a cyclone passes them out to sea, but the violent seas, lashed by winds of up to 200 kilometers an hour, can leave their mark, even if a cyclone does not cross the coast. In its wake, it may leave vast stretches of coastline and sandy beaches battered and eroded. Queensland has more than 5,000 kilometers of coastline, and a lot of it is subject to rapid and severe erosion from heavy seas. Waves gouge into the sand, dragging it back out to sea, where it's deposited offshore to form sandbars. But the sea can also work to protect the beaches. During mild weather, the action of the waves and tides will return the sand to the beach. It's a constant cycle, with the beach a mobile system alternating between erosion and growth. Some beaches are not so quick to recover from the effects of erosion. It's a race against time as the cyclone approaches. Boulders and solid fill are poured by the ton in an attempt to hold back the sea. Millions of dollars worth of property development lines the Queensland coast, and in many areas, severe erosion has now meant a fight for survival. Local authorities have spent a lot of money in their attempts to control beach erosion. A single cyclone or heavy seas and a high tide may make their efforts seem in vain. The property may be saved, but the beaches scarred. Beach protection throughout the world is a new science, and the theories are wide-ranging. On South Stradbroke Island off Queensland's southern coast, some of the theories are being tested by the Beach Protection Authority, a body set up by the Queensland government to examine erosion control. Erosion once endangered the very existence of this island. Strong winds forced the sand back from the beach into the hinterland. As the sand moved inland, the sea pressed onwards. Without erosion control, the island would have moved steadily towards the mainland, eventually to be deposited on the coast. The key to combating erosion here is the sand dune. Dunes form a buffer, keeping the sand within the foreshore area. They also allow the natural cycle of sand moving to and from the offshore bar to be maintained. But dunes need vegetation. Without plant growth to trap wind-blown sand, the dunes become unstable, but they can be reclaimed. The senior dune conservationist for the Beach Protection Authority, Mr. David Barr.
The first step really in a wind-eroded dune like these were is to remove the cause of the erosion. And in this particular case, it was the cause were cattle grazing on the dunes, and they were removed in about 1971. Now, the steps following that were to erect sand drift fences, to rebuild the frontal dune where necessary, followed by planting of grass, sand spinifex grass, together with the application of fertiliser, and then over the bare sand surface brush matting is placed, and this temporarily stabilises the sand until the vegetation can take over the job of doing the stabilisation work. The dunes can be completely restored. This type of dune particularly, these are young dunes. They're subject to frequent cycles of erosion and accretion, and there is no real problem in replacing the vegetation back on the dunes during an accretion phase.
Dune erosion can result from man's activities. Dune buggies, tourist development, even people walking on dunes all add to the problem. So the Beach Protection Authority has fenced off trial areas for their experiments. Once the dunes have suffered damage, the primary aim is to stabilise the sand. Brian Mason heads the authority's experimental station.
The first step in stabilising sand, of course, is to plant the pioneer species. In this area, it's mostly sand spinifex. Then, of course, it's necessary to keep the sand in position. So usually, and it's certainly in the past, the most productive method has been to cut small pieces of brush and spread this over the sand. Now, in some urban areas, the brush is getting difficult to find and expensive to move. So here in this trial, we're looking at substitutes, spray-on mulches and so on.
This particular test here, very little growth seems to have come up through it. What's happened?
Well, this is a bitumen emulsion mixed with water and sprayed on the surface. As you can see, the surface has been very effective. The seal has been very effective. The wind hasn't been able to cause much damage. However, at the same time, it's allowed very little germination. There's only probably 1 or 2 clumps of grass come through. This was another product, spray-on mulch, but as you can see, it wasn't very effective. The surface broke down completely. Wind has got into it and completely blown it out, and there's only about 2 or 3 clumps of grass left, and they're being blown out too.
So these 2 tests haven't proved as effective as brush matting. Is there any test that has?
Yes, some of the other treatments that we've used, Curasol has been particularly effective both on its own and when used with straw. What we do in that case, straw is put down first and the Curasol sprayed on it.
Wind-blown sand was the major erosion factor on this island. Every time the wind speed doubles, the volume of sand moved is increased 8 times. So the pioneer species is important. The authority has done extensive studies on dune grasses. Worldwide, only about 3 plant species are known to regenerate on sand dunes for our purposes. Of these, only 1 really fills Queensland's needs.
This grass is the sand spinifex, and its significance is that it's a pioneer species. It's one of the earliest grasses to establish itself. It's very wind resistant and salt tolerant and is therefore able to spread over the surface of the bare sand, and it has a great capacity to trap large quantities of sand and therefore form dunes. Well, when it traps sand, it traps it evenly, whereas some of these other species, say the pigface, tends to trap sand and form hummocks.
Numerous vegetation types are being tested. Many of them grow well with the spinifex. Shrubs and trees are also grown to support and stabilize the area directly behind the frontal dunes. The most important is the native casuarina. The plants are cultivated as seedlings in nurseries on the island. The key to a well-vegetated dune system is the natural cycling of plant nutrients. With unstable sand, soluble nutrients are rapidly leached out, and re-establishing the nutrient cycle is a long, slow process.
In this trial, we're looking at the nutrient requirements of casuarina, how best to promote early, rapid growth. Well, if you look at this tree as an example, on a monthly basis, we measure the basal diameter and the height of the tree, and we note any deficiencies in colour and so on with the plant.
What is that difference in colour there likely to mean?
Most likely the tree is deficient in nitrogen, and that's the reason for the discoloration of the leaves. It seems to indicate that if you want early rapid growth, and that's the main aim, then you should have a planting program. At this stage in the trial, of course, it's too early to say what fertiliser should be used.
Are these trees all growing in different sorts of fertiliser combinations?
Yes, it's a standard emission trial, which means that you start off with all elements, including trace elements, and then gradually drop out one element, so that you've got a comparison and you can fix which element is limiting.
Now, how have the trees that haven't had any fertiliser been growing?
Well, compared with, say, this tree, they're very backward. Most of them would only be about half as high, and they wouldn't have any of this branching. The basal diameter, they'd be much thinner. And obviously, they're going to take a lot longer to, say, reach a height of 3 to 5 feet than a tree that's been fertilised like this one.
The landward movement of sand, which threatened to engulf the island, has been halted in the short time the authority has been here. But there are a few reminders.
The work that has been done here is certainly applicable, completely applicable, to areas as far north as Fraser Island, and applicable in a lesser degree perhaps, but still quite applicable to areas probably as far north as Cairns.
Now, what about the Gold Coast? Could you describe some of the methods that they are using there?
They're using methods on the Gold Coast similar to what are being used here to stabilise the sand. But prior to this occurring, it was necessary to rebuild the beaches because they had been eroded away and they could not move in a landward direction because these areas were fully developed with roads and high-rise buildings. So the methods that were used there initially were to pump sand onto the beach and also to build one or two experimental groins.
To erosion of the beach, there's a need to compromise the various opinions on beach restoration. To deny the public access to beaches would be unrealistic and unnecessary. So too would be a total halt to beachfront development, but certain steps are essential. Here, the local authority, which works closely with the Beach Protection Authority, planted sand spinifex and erected drift fences to trap the sand in an effort to re-establish a frontal dune system. The attempts have been largely successful, with the sand level steadily increasing. But erosion can occur again. In fact, the sand coast erodes all the time through wind and wave action, but the effect is counterbalanced with nature carrying out continual repairs, provided the dunes are restored. Beach erosion, in general, is an act of nature, but it can be magnified when the means used by nature to counteract erosion are tampered with. Common sense dictates many of the future plans for beaches, so there is a tone of optimism despite the many problems, and it's probably well-founded, if only from the knowledge that beaches can be saved.